Hello and welcome to Any Means Necessary, the information design podcast where we explore past and present design problems by any means necessary. My name is Shadi Swedan, and today I'm joined by my fellow classmates.
Hi, I'm April.
Hi, I'm Arthur.
Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hey, it's Kurt.
Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, it's Wyatt.
Awesome. And today we'll be discussing all problems, experiences, and tips relating to communication before and after info design, including mental thought processes and the absorption of information through various media. Before we begin, we'd like to remind everyone listening that we are no way experts on the topics being discussed, but rather speak on personal and collective experiences in the information design program at Mount Royal University and beyond. With that being said, I will pass the mic over to Arthur to get us started on communication.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this topic of communication and just like the differences before entering the information design program and after, since we're all 4 years about to graduate, the differences in how we communicate, think, or approach things in general. Yeah, so I'd like to pass the question to you guys, just to ask, have you guys experienced any difference before and after? Like, do you feel like the way you talk, the way you think, or even like, as you're reading the book, you're like, I don't really like this font, like little things like that. Whether is there any difference in how you look at things, how you think, or even just how you communicate? Because I find myself like communicating very differently or more aware, I would say, like when I speak to different people, or there's a difference. Not sure it's because now that I'm properly educated, so I speak a bit more educated, sound more educated, but is there any difference? I'm just curious. So I'll hand it over to you guys and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I can't go anywhere without overanalyzing, typeface choices and like wayfinding. It's almost annoying. Like Arthur, I was talking to you earlier about I can't even like read a book without looking at the type, which I mean, it's awesome because it's really interesting. But yeah, definitely overanalyze things now.
If I could give you a little bit of a heads up, that's never going to end. Because I know we're more than just designers, but when I went through my first foray through design school way back when, I went exactly through the same thing, Caitlin, and then people just start whatever. It's almost like I felt like people start looking at me weird because it's like, yeah, I'm admiring that bus ad and the layout of the font and its font choices and the impact and and it's like, yeah, and then you turn left and there's another one to do the same thing too, right? And I certainly went through the same thing, and I really wish I could say that it ends. It doesn't. I think that's where, when you guys probably all first met me, it's like, who does this guy think he is? I thought I did a good job or whatever. But you get so good at it, and I can't wait until you're all a design snob such as me. That's your future.
I think we're all there. I think we're all design snobs officially.
Yeah, I'm always looking at those little details and I constantly overanalyze everything.
Yeah, it's like when I don't see enough negative space, or even when I see an ad sometimes, like I'm like, why would you do that? That's such a bad way of storytelling. Can you please do it differently? Or when somebody's trying to explain something and I would be like, even if it's just a casual thing, like, a bunch of friends just chatting, gaming on call, and I'm just like, actually, you can explain it better if you were to go and just focus on these points. And he's like, dude, this is not academic. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. It's just a habit right now. So yeah, it's interesting. And I'm also glad I'm not the only one.
I actually notice a lot when I follow like a bunch of like design pages on like Instagram and stuff, social media, whatever. And they're like coaching design tips, but then like I look at like what they produced in this little post or whatever that's supposed to give you ideas, and it looks like garbage. Like, I mean, obviously anybody can do it, but they have like hundreds of thousands of followers, and I'm like, that's not good design.
Yeah. That being said, I also have such a deeper appreciation when I see good design. It's like, all that like background, like the research, the, all of the background stuff that we do, the public facing final product, you don't always get to see that. So I have a much greater appreciation for good design when I see it now.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because I always like to liken things or make analogies towards sports or something like that, right? It's easy to watch a hockey game and go, oh, shoot the puck, man, or whatever else, or whatever, football, tennis, you name it, right? Golf. When you actually go out there and do these things and understand the process behind it, right? It makes you extremely appreciative of the craft that's presented in front of you, especially as you said, Caitlin, like knowing the process behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, Kirk, because like from being an outsider, like not in the information design program, you think all these aspects are so trivial, like, the design of a poster, but really it's like integral to sending the message home. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, and we kind of mentioned something about you could kind of judge between a good piece or a bad piece, or what the heck were they thinking on whatever other side of the piece or whatever. Maybe I can deepen the conversation, because it kind of comes to that classic Venn diagram of design work, right? And we're all supposed to be really, I guess, well rehearsed in it, where it's like you have a circle that has time, and then you have another circle that's money, and you have another one that's quality, right? And there's sort of kind of a balancing act in those sort of things. And I remember what I used to see, whatever, say maybe a local Calgary commercial or something like that, and it's like, oh, this guy's selling me a car. It's like such low budget and it's crap, you know what I mean? But there you go. You bring up that Venn diagram. They didn't have a lot of time, and they didn't have a big budget, so quality was kind of something that was pushed down the ranks, if that makes sense, right? And so it is neat to see execution on that balancing act and consider those three factors. I'm pretty sure we encountered that particular, whatever, that triangle or whatever in. I think it was one of Kelsey's classes. I'm not sure. She always has so many great slide decks and everything like that. But does everyone know what I'm talking about? That triangle of whatever, quality, time, and budget.
I do, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, consider that while you add that layer in as you analyze other people's work.
I think one of the coming into the program, one of the biggest issues I had was definitely, I guess, having the proper thought process. I never really thought of it like, oh, you need to have a proper thought process. Like, the mental needs to be clean, organized in the way you kind of approach things, or how you kind of like, you need to think of this first, and then you go to this, and then you go to this. And what I'm referring to is when I was first introduced to our lovely professor, Gil, in rhetoric, Com 2663. And then, following after that, we had Gil again for the second time in year 3. He taught me a lot. Like, I think those were the two classes that changed me a lot in the way I kind of like my mental process works, just in general, and even in the way I write, like, when I do social media stuff, and the way I describe, and the way I storytell, like, that was like a huge thing for me in the past, that I would struggle so much with it. That was one of the issues I had. And then after information design, after going through Gil's class and how he's like, this is how you analyze things, this is how you tell a story properly, and you go straight to the point. And it's like, everything is just like, good information after good information, and it's also well like thought out. And it's quite surprising, because the other day I was just sitting down thinking about it, and I was like, I would have never thought of, like, let's say I would describe things in a certain way, or I'll tell stories in a certain way. But I guess, yeah, after going through Gil's class and doing our lab reports, wonderful lab reports, and countless and countless of essays that we do for him, it honestly really helped me like organize my mental. I don't know if you guys feel anything like that.
I think that's really interesting, because like you realize once you're in information design that everything, like whether it be a social media post or like an essay, everything has a formula. And to make it like more impactful, you have to sort of play off that formula. So yeah, being information designers, we definitely have to sort of find the right balance, as Kirk said, with the Venn diagram to make that formula sort of work. Yeah.
Yeah, Arthur, you bringing up Gil, his rhetoric class literally changed my academic life. Like how I write essays. I mean, even how I read large chunks of texts. Like I read the intro, I read the conclusion, and I read some topic sentences, and I get the gist of what happens. If I need to read more, I do, but that definitely helped a lot throughout this degree.
I do the exact same thing. I just scan everything.
Yeah.
It also kind of leads into the art of persuasion and then like the ethos, pathos, logos type of idea, because that was really incorporated into a lot of our classes, especially Gil's classes, and even like design classes as well. I know one of Ben's, we did like poster ads or whatever with the ethos, pathos, and logos. So I think persuasion is definitely a big learning curve, and it definitely helps us in writing essays or creating design in general too.
Yeah, April, I totally agree. And I think something I remember, especially from Gil's class, is he said the first thing you have to do when you're persuading people is to like find commonality, like find common ground and something that they'll agree with, and then you can sort of suck them into the persuasion that you're trying to convince them of. And I think that's so important because I mean that's useful in any aspect of life, you know.
So one thing I find really interesting as well is we're talking about design and writing, how our communication has changed in that sense, but we also study a lot of communication theory in our program as well. And to specifically one class that I just completed, Com 3500 with Richard, we talked about a lot of things from media, the public sphere and group movements, and even in Info 4679 with Glenn, we learned about in the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. We learned about classical and romantic thinking styles and kind of the idea around quality as well. And so one thing I really liked, for example, in Com 3500 was the idea of manufacturing consent, and is basically talking about how mass media will kind of pass through these filters before it actually reaches people. And some of these examples are concentrated ownership. And so basically media won't really press anything out unless it revolves around the idea of profit and advertisers and all this. And so kind of all of these topics in a sense kind of make you think in a different way. And I think that's a big part of being an information designer as well, is learning that communication theory and kind of using it behind your work as well. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll maybe add to that or whatever. It's just, yeah, after you go through these communication classes and things like that, like, you know, in general, like I too, I had a blast in 3500. I had the pleasure to work by the side of the genius Wyatt as well, you know. But what I really enjoyed that we went through in that class, like him and I would kind of bounce off ideas and get that dialogue rolling. You know, it was just kind of part of the discussion all the time, right? And you know, I really wish that you know, after taking a class like that, that everyone in the world would, to some effect, be aware of how, yeah, communication is handled, right? And again, as you brought up, you know, through 3500 or whatever, you learn about the media and how they, it's really like a strategy that they put their message out there, and you know, you can consume it with that in mind instead of being kind of, you know, leap of blind faith and just trusting that content, right? So yeah, I got a lot out of that class too. It's funny that you mentioned that one, Shadi.
I think that class, like with us being in it together and us like bouncing ideas off each other, that helped us to like condense and really be concise in like how we would like convey our thoughts and like do those assignments and that. So that's another big portion of that class as well.
I think too, like not just within Glenn's class or Richard's class, but in the whole sphere of university, like it teaches you to think critically, and I think that's the most important thing you could ever take away from it. Because a lot of people don't think like that, especially nowadays. Like Kirk said, you know, young people don't really take a lot of time to ponder and think about sort of the things that affect them the most. And I especially think within our program, we stress that more than anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not only the professors that we and the courses that we learn all these things, I felt like, as I went through this program, for example, like Glenn's classes and primarily Gil's classes, being able to kind of like see like April and Caitlin helped me a lot in that course, and seeing the way both of them write and see them grow in terms of the way they write and how well they condense information, or how they kind of like craft their story in their, be it essays or reports, taught me a lot too, and it influenced the way I thought, influenced the way I write. So it's kind of nice how like it's not only the course, but when the course affects you and all the people around you, and you kind of get the best not only from the professor, you kind of get the best out of, for me, for example, I got the best out of like Caitlin, and I got the best out of April, and I learned a lot from them. And then when I work with Wyatt on certain projects, the way he, his thought process and the way he designs certain things, it kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of things. So this course talks, this whole entire program talks a lot about empathy and thinking empathetic and all that jazz. And I would have never really thought of it that way, especially since I went to school in Asia. And then after this program, it kind of like, I'm just blown away every single day, So I think that's the beauty of this program, and that's something that made me want to talk about this topic, is because there's a lot of like little intricate things that kind of like affected communication, the way I think, and just everything in general that I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, Arthur, I agree. Like, not to say that I was a psychopath before this program, but I certainly I certainly look at things through a much deeper empathetic lens because of the courses we've taken.
And yeah, I think with the entire political climate and the civil unrest that's happening in the world today, like people need to have more empathy and putting themselves in other people's shoes, just to gain common ground and understand sort of the struggles people are going through. So I think that's an incredible outcome from this course and this program. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that, actually, because one of the big things that we learned, so I mean, you have a point saying that a lot of the world is kind of falling apart in a sense of a social sphere. There's a lot of problems going on in the world, but having that ability to think empathetically towards these problems is kind of falls in the realm of information design as well, because we kind of go through these processes of system thinking, for example, and design thinking, and it's a great methodology, because when you go through a process of systems thinking, for example, you kind of bring together all perspectives on a certain issue, topic, or kind of project that you're working on. And actually, I just listened to, pertaining to design thinking, I just listened to a few podcasts on design thinking, which basically says that we kind of have to, it's a methodology that you have to follow kind of step by step, and it's not necessarily a recipe for success. Everyone kind of has to be on board. There has to be a culture behind it, and you have to kind of take all these perspectives into account and kind of push it forward using these steps. And yeah, I think most definitely, like in information design, we take in all perspectives and use that empathy to a great capacity, right? We can really push out some great projects with it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And another thing I also wanted to bring up was Com 2501, Media History and Contemporary Issues. I had the pleasure of taking that class with Ian. He's a wonderful professor. And I remember during that period, I was like, just like every student, why am I studying this? Why am I studying media history? Why do I need to know this? And then fast forward a year later, I'm like, oh, because I'm suddenly able to see and separate all the different things, like how information is constantly being churned out there, being put out there, being produced, and just news, information everywhere. And there's like so much, right? From like social media to like news outlets to even just physical newspapers and magazines. And actually a lot of it made me, I kind of like hit this enlightenment, as you can say, that what I learned in media history and contemporary issues, where they talk a lot about how the media works, how do journalists works, what's the process like. It made me able to kind of like seeth out the information and scan out for like, oh, actually based on back checking so many different information, this is the actual news, or like this is the actual news, because sometimes there's like fake news and there's like biased news, and you can kind of tell like, oh, this news outlet is actually kind of biased, or like this source is not as reliable, and you can kind of like fact check and everything. You kind of see above all the noise and mess that the internet and social media and just news outlets have in general today. And I think it's just, that was definitely good, because there was definitely a barrier that I had coming into the program, just not being able to kind of like tell what is true, what is not true, what is unreliable, what's reliable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually was going to say that this program has like made me a lot more critical of the kind of information that I take in and what I actually deem as like a credible source and anything like that. So it's definitely taught me to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's done. And when you look at how information's translated, you really understand the power of how information turns into actions and movements and stuff like that. And you can sort of see, like in the course Arthur was talking about, when you look back at like media history, you can understand why, like in Nazi Germany, like all the information that they were putting forward, it was propaganda, and how people believed that. So you can sort of use that wisdom from the past of what you've learned to put that forward in what you're creating as an information designer, and I guess try to build a better future.
Yeah, with myself, I don't know how I've kind of approached a lot of these courses in that sense. It's neat to kind of be sprung on this new concept of like, yeah, sourcing, finding proper sources, and the art of convincingness, and all those particulars. And I feel, yeah, I walked into the program having realizations of those particulars, but what I got in return from this program is a more thorough analysis of those procedures, I guess. And now I'm a lot more heightened on awareness on those particulars of convincingness and things like that. I remember touching base with it when I was, again, talking to my old design school, but we didn't really focus on theory or proper sourcing and things like that. And now I just feel, I don't know, I just feel bulletproof, man. Like, I just feel heightened on the fact that, when you proper information in a proper place, and it's sourced correctly without bias, or to an everything is biased in the end or whatever, but you can, almost set up like a measurement as to how slanted certain messaging is, I guess, into a, convincingness into a particular pocket, I guess, is what I'm getting at, right? And I've certainly heightened my awareness through this program for sure.
It's actually funny because coming into this program, I had never done anything with like Adobe. Like I'd never worked with InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop, like zero. And going through classes like tools for info designers, like you can come into this program. I think this is kind of what I'm trying to put across, is that you can come into this program without any prior experience. So I'm losing my voice. Any prior experience, and you can learn the systems and the programs and all that. Like it gives you everything that you need to become an info designer, graphic designer, like whatever way you want to take it. This program, as long as you kind of go into your own head and kind of figure out what you want to specialize in, you can get the tools from these professors.
Yeah, like that's one thing I feel like I've gotten more. Like I get excited when I find a new tool or a new piece of software and things like that. And this is something, you name the course that we've taken with Kelsey, of course, right? She's always emphasizing that there's no strict acceptance of particular like tools, especially on the software angle of things, right? And you name the course. I think she's just giving this full spectrum of all the tools that are available to us, and she's not talking about Adobe or InDesign or anything. And it's nice to have whatever knowledge of vector creation in general. So whatever tool you're using to do that, all the power to you. Chances are you're using Illustrator, so we'll have conversations in those pods or whatever. But I'm talking about like those ethnographic charts and those particular tables that we fill in and things like that. And hey, I'm kind of absorbing my environment around me and writing it down and using that as a tool and leveraging our design work, right? And it's absolutely something I never focused on, because again, when I did keep talking about my old courses, we were really Adobe tool centric on our approach, and it's, you need to learn Photoshop, here's how you do layers and things like that. And I it's nice to know the tool and have understanding on a computer level, I suppose, but all these other tools that take us outside and create experiences for us to, capture into or apply with those other particular tools. I'm walking away with just a wealth of that, and I'm taking those to the bank. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, the software is only as good as the user. Lots of people can learn a software. With this program, we've learned how to use it with intention.
And so now I have kind of a question for all of you. Thanks for sharing your perspectives and how like the different courses and how our latest course that we took from Glenn has kind of like changed certain aspects of our lives. But now I'm just kind of wondering in terms of like approaches or tools, how has there been any change like after information design? For example, while I am a sucker for tradition and the old school way of doing a lot of things, like I only did pencil drawing. When I did typography, everybody was like, hey, move to Illustrator, and I was like, nah, I don't want to do digital art. Like everything has to be hand drawn, and everything has to kind of like the old way of doing things. But kind of after this program, I have like a different approach, and especially now that I know how to use the digital tools and I have a different way of thinking, I'm kind of like oh, okay, digital art is kind of cool too. So I don't know, just for you guys, in terms of approaches and tools, before and after the program, has there been any change in heart or whatsoever?
I think I've discussed this to death with you guys in the past or whatever. My biggest change is the sketch work. It's the sketch work. The preemptive planning. For me, it was really nice to leverage this university experience to really work on that approach. I suppose it's the biggest takeaway for me personally. I used to do a lot of design work again. Out there, and I would sit at the computer and just kind of work at it, use the tools that we're talking about, and till I got something that really looked pretty. I'll be honest with you. And now that I've gotten the approach, I feel I can just amaze myself now, and it's a really great buzz to get out of this program for myself personally, because again, my export is absolutely heightened because of the tools that we've learned in this program.
Yeah, I think through like Kelsey's and Ben's classes, I've learned a lot about like the process and even just like the thought process, but also just like process documents, getting to like a final draft, and going through all these iterations and just doing everything. Like anything worth doing is worth overdoing, and just putting all that information out there really gets you to like a better final design. And that's the biggest thing that I think I've taken out of this program, is actually just going through the motions essentially.
Yeah, and I'd say like at the beginning of the program, I had a really hard time with just being happy doing a low fidelity sketch or prototype. I found myself always wanting to like push it, always make it high fidelity when like that's just not necessary. And that low fidelity step can be really valuable in seeing flaws in design and things that are important.
Yeah, definitely. Before, I never understood, let's say, what's the use of the persona and, or like low fidelity work and all that. Never really understood it. I'm like, why? That is, a waste of time, or it's a small matter. We don't really need to care about, demographic. Or when we did the community branding work in Kelsey's class, kind of like you have to go down, you have to kind of see like the community, get a feel for it, and then there's just so many other things that you kind of think of, and I never really thought of it. I was like, oh, this is not important. But then fast forward, now we're at the end of the program. Even when let's say when I'm teaching my dance class, depending on the demographic and the background and the age my students come from, I consider the persona. I kind of like see the environment, and I'm like, okay, these are a bunch of young gamers who want to learn how to dance, and I approach them differently, and I realize I get way better response, compared to before, where I was just, so hard-headed and like, no, this is the only way I can do it. So, just a lot of little things like that. Like definitely that changed me a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Know your audience, man.
Yeah, one of the big things for me, actually, I'll agree with Arthur. I mean, I used to do art my entire life. I went to Central and I did PVA art, which is kind of like IB art. I went to art school my entire life, but as soon as I went to this program, I kind of lost my ability to kind of draw, and that's on me. It's not really the program's fault. But one thing I noticed that was really interesting was that I've now taken, because before when I was doing art, it was mostly for myself, right? I just wanted to make something that kind of looked cool. And I wouldn't really go as far as to call it art now, but it's kind of interesting how we create different graphics and kind of art styles, for example, to kind of have a meaning, kind of have a purpose in some way, or kind of to do good in the world. For example, when we did the system maps for Humanly in Kelsey's class, we're using human-centered design to kind of come up with these system maps and kind of approach an idea with asking how might we change it and how might we bring good to the world, right? And so although I've kind of lost my ability, again, on me, to draw with pen and paper, it's kind of transformed into something that's bigger than I ever thought it could be through this program. And that's something I really appreciate and will take with me for the rest of my career.
Yeah, you and I always have a good laugh, Shadi, about, you freak me out. You're like the same guy as me and all that sort of stuff. And I went through the exact same thing. I was out there. I always kind of hesitate to call myself an artist, if that makes sense. I took art school, did really well, won art awards when I was in high school, and I have those great accomplishments, but I was really just settled at that point on, it looks really cool. So, therefore it is, right? And everyone's done this, like if you think about modern art, or, you look at a yellow square with a red line painted through it and things like that. And you're like, well, that's not art. You want to see art, look at what I can do. Right. And now I think, as again, we've been talking about critical thinking earlier in this episode, where, what does a red line through a yellow square represent? What is the meaning of that? Where the placement is of that line, and how big it is, and what's the impact? And I think we could all kind of analyze things in that capacity now. Now, again, if you still think that sort of thing is rubbish, then fair enough. But it's always good to gather the artist's intent on things like that, and especially as we're designers, we take that intent and we apply it visually.
I think especially if you have meaning behind, like, per se, like say a logo or a certain design, or even reasoning behind it, it allows for the audience to understand it more and to get a better idea of what you're trying to get across, essentially.
Yeah, and another thing too is kind of like how, regardless of the degree that you're taking, you have to take gen eds, minors, or well, not really minors, but you have to take electives and gen eds. And so before I entered information design, I was in art history and modern architecture. And then I also took art history when I was in information design. And the way I listened to class, the way I absorbed the information, and the way I processed the information, and the way I kind of like, heard the stories and what, how it kind of like gets absorbed into my brain, I felt it changed very drastically from before. It's just like, I looked at it from a very structural standpoint, Yes, this is a painting. These are the brushstrokes, I'll ask different questions, like, oh, how did he paint it? What medium? What's the canvas? How did it affect, the drying? What's the longevity of the paint and everything? And these are the questions I'll ask, which is, I mean, kind of expected of someone who came from trades and engineering. And then when after information design, I found myself kind of like, why? Why did he approach it from this angle? Or why did he, what's the story behind it? What was he thinking when he did this? Or kind of like, oh, he was feeling this way, therefore that's why he created this. So it's kind of interesting, like as everybody mentions, the before and after, how they say like a film student after film school can never watch movies properly ever again. I think it's kind of the same. Like I can never absorb information the same way.
I almost feel like I'm 3 years old again. I'm asking why for everything all again, which is funny. I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think that also brings to mind sort of the merging of um, romanticism and classicism like in one, which is what Percy kind of says is the definition of quality. Like it's a seamless thing which overrides both sorts of perspectives, and I think that that has to do with like yeah, when you look at a piece of art, if it's like a red line, well, that can be something to do with the romantic aspect, but as well as the classical aspect. Like it's everything encompassed in one, and yeah, I think understanding the perspectives is important, but realizing that they all play into one, you know, united thing is important too.
Yeah, so it's nice to see everybody's different opinions and perspective on the outcomes before and after kind of contrast, you know, that they got out of information design. I'm glad I'm not the only one, because I would be thinking like, oh, maybe I kind of like look too deep into it when I'm not supposed to. But yeah, it's really, really nice. And for those listening, I really hope, you know, you guys look forward and, you know, kind of like maybe the next time you listen in class, you know that something amazing is about to happen after that.
And with that being said, looks like we are out of time for today, but thank you all for participating, and thank you all at home for tuning in today. We hope you've enjoyed and learned about how to become the best designer you can be. We talked about differences in visual and thought in communication, as well as talking about the collective and individual changes of communication that we have changed, that have changed us as people and designers. We encourage you to join us next week and apply these topics in your profession, of course, by any means necessary. Thank you.